heavy oak door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a death sentence. Victoria stood frozen in the dimly lit corridor of Northbrook Manor, her wedding gown still glowing like fresh snow under the flickering candlelight. Her husband's words rang in her ears sharp as broken glass. "You are nothing but a contract on paper. Never expect me to touch you. Never expect me to love you. I already have the woman I love, and she is waiting for me in London." Cassian Drake, the Duke of Northbrook, had spoken those words without raising his voice. No anger, no regret, just cold, brutal honesty. Then he had turned the key from the inside, locking her out of the bridal chamber on their wedding night. She pressed a trembling hand against the carved wood, her breath shallow. For one terrifying moment, she thought her legs might give way. This was supposed to be the beginning of her new life. Instead, it felt like the end of everything she had ever hoped for. Victoria Ashford had known this marriage was not born of love. She was the youngest daughter of a ruined earl. Her family's debts had grown so heavy that bankruptcy loomed like a hangman's noose. When the Duke of Northbrook offered for her hand, her father had wept with relief. She had accepted her fate with quiet dignity, telling herself that respect might grow in time, that perhaps one day affection could bloom. She had been wrong. Now standing alone in the grand hallway of her new home, Victoria felt the full weight of her reality crash down. Cassian didn't want a wife. He wanted a name on a legal document, a shield, a convenient duchess to silence the whispers about his scandalous attachment to Isolde Vesper, the beautiful, ambitious widow who had held his heart long before this marriage was arranged. A soft footstep made her flinch. "Your Grace, Mrs." Bramley, the housekeeper, appeared at the end of the corridor, her face carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying quiet pity. "Shall I prepare the blue guest chamber for you tonight?" Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat. Even the servants already knew. The news had traveled faster than her own heartbeat. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you, Mrs. Bramley." As she followed the older woman through the maze of silent corridors, Victoria kept her chin high. She would not cry. Not here. Not where anyone could see. But inside, something deep and fragile was cracking. Northbrook Manor was breathtaking, towering ceilings, ancient tapestries, and gardens that stretched into moonlit darkness. Yet to Victoria, every shadow felt like a cage. Every portrait of past duchesses seemed to watch her with silent judgment. "You are not wanted here." Later that night, after the household had finally gone to sleep, Victoria slipped out through the side doors into the rose garden. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of late-blooming flowers. Moonlight silvered the petals, turning the garden into something almost magical. She walked until she reached the stone fountain at the center. There, hidden from every window, she finally let the tears fall. Hot, silent, endless. How could one man's indifference cut so deeply? She had sacrificed her dreams, her future, even her chance at real love, all to save her family. And in return, she had received a title, a cold mansion, and a husband who saw her as less than nothing. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the fountain. "I will not break," she whispered into the night, her voice trembling but growing steadier with every word. "I will not let this marriage destroy me." A new feeling stirred beneath the pain, not hope yet, but something sharper, a quiet, burning resolve. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and lifted her gaze to the stars. This was her life now. A golden prison, a loveless contract. But she would not die inside it. Victoria Ashford, no, Victoria Drake, Duchess of Northbrook, made a silent vow beneath the indifferent moon. She would survive. She would endure. And one day, she would make this cold, beautiful world her own. Weeks turned into months inside the cold walls of Northbrook Manor. Victoria moved through the grand rooms like a ghost in her own home. She rarely saw her husband. Cassian left for London before dawn most days and returned long after the candles were extinguished. When their paths did cross, he offered only polite nods and empty pleasantries, his eyes always distant, always somewhere else. But Victoria refused to wither. She began with the abandoned rose garden, the same place where she had cried on her wedding night. At first she worked alone, her hands blistered from pulling weeds and turning soil. Then she asked Mrs. Bramley for a few strong lads from the stables. Within weeks, the wild tangle of thorns transformed. Old roses gave way to neat rows of lavender, chamomile, foxglove, and feverfew. A hidden garden of healing herbs now bloomed where only neglect had lived before. Word spread quietly among the servants. One morning a young kitchen maid approached her hesitantly in the still room. "Your Grace, my mother's cough has grown worse. The village doctor says there is nothing more he can do." Victoria didn't hesitate. She prepared a small bundle of dried herbs carefully wrapped with instructions written in her own elegant hand. 2 days later, the maid returned with tears in her eyes. Her mother had slept through the night for the first time in weeks. From that moment, the servants began to look at her differently. Not with pity anymore, but with quiet respect. Victoria took it further. She discovered that several tenant families were struggling after a poor harvest. Instead of asking Cassian, who would likely dismiss the matter, she began painting again. Small, delicate watercolors of the estate gardens and the rolling hills. She sold them through a discreet dealer in London under a false name, using every shilling to buy grain, blankets, and medicine for the families in need. No one knew it was her, except one man. Mr. Quill, the estate manager, found her one afternoon in the old library, surrounded by ledgers and half-finished sketches. He cleared his throat gently. "Your Grace, I've noticed the improvements. The tenants speak of you with warmth I haven't heard in years." He paused, his voice lowering. "If I may be so bold, His Grace has never concerned himself with these matters, but you see them?" Victoria offered a small, tired smile, but her eyes remained guarded. "I see what needs to be done, Mr. Quill, that is all." "That is." As spring gave way to early summer, the changes became impossible to ignore. The herb garden flourished. Children in the village no longer suffered as many fevers. The tenants' faces looked less drawn, less hopeless. Cassian began hearing the name Duchess spoken with genuine affection by his own staff. At first he dismissed it as idle gossip, but the frequency of the praise unsettled him. He had expected his new wife to remain invisible, a silent ornament. Instead, she was quietly becoming the heart of Northbrook. And then Lucian Drake arrived. Cassian's cousin rode in unannounced one warm afternoon, his handsome face wearing its usual calculating smile. Lucian was everything Cassian was not, charming on the surface, ruthless beneath. As the presumptive heir should Cassian die without issue, he watched every development at Northbrook with sharp, jealous eyes. He found Victoria in the garden, kneeling beside a bed of lavender. "Dear cousin-in-law," he drawled, leaning against a stone pillar. "I hear you've been keeping yourself busy. How admirable." Most duchesses content themselves with balls and embroidery. Victoria rose slowly, brushing dirt from her apron. She met his gaze without flinching. "Idle hands serve no one, Lord Lucian." He chuckled softly, but his eyes were cold. "Be careful, Your Grace. Not everyone appreciates a wife who casts too long a shadow, especially when her husband's affections already lie elsewhere." The words stung like a hidden thorn. Victoria felt the old wound reopen, the memory of Cassian's cold rejection on their wedding night flashing through her mind. She forced her expression to remain calm, but inside anger and loneliness twisted together like vines around her heart. That night, as rain pattered against the tall windows, Victoria sat alone in her chamber. The pain of Cassian's indifference had not faded. It had only grown heavier with time. Yet alongside it bloomed something new, a fierce, quiet pride in what she had accomplished without him. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming. Then came the day that changed everything. A frantic messenger burst into the courtyard. A child in the village, little Thomas, only 5 years old, had fallen gravely ill with a high fever and convulsions. The local doctor was away. The boy's mother was screaming in terror. Victoria didn't wait for permission. She gathered her herbs, her carefully copied medical notes, and rode to the cottage herself. For hours she worked without rest, cooling the child's body, brewing infusions, staying by his bedside through the long, terrifying night. She whispered soothing words when the boy cried, held his small hand when the fever made him tremble. By dawn, the convulsions had stopped. The fever broke. Thomas opened his eyes and whispered, "Mama, the pretty lady saved me." The news spread like wildfire through the village and beyond. For the first time, the people of Northbrook spoke of their Duchess not with polite deference, but with awe. That same evening, Cassian returned early from London. He stood at the edge of the courtyard as Victoria dismounted, her dress stained with mud and medicine exhaustion clear on her face. Their eyes met across the distance. For the first time since their wedding night, Cassian looked at her, really looked at her with something other than indifference. There was surprise in his gaze, and the faintest flicker of unease. As if for the very first time, the Duke of Northbrook realized that the quiet woman he had married might be far more dangerous to his carefully guarded heart than he had ever imagined. The invitation to the grand ball in London arrived like an unexpected storm. Cassian had organized the event to rally support for his ambitious land reform bill. The ballroom of his London residence glittered with crystal chandeliers and the laughter of the ton. Victoria stood beside him at the entrance, her emerald silk gown catching the light, her posture perfect, her face calm. But inside she felt the familiar ache. She had not wanted to come, yet refusing would only feed the whispers already circulating. Lucian had made sure of that. Throughout the evening she caught fragments of conversation, sharp, poisoned words carried on silk fans and behind gloved hands. They say the new Duchess spends her days playing gardener like a commoner. Useless in every way that matters, poor thing. And they call her the Duchess of Northbrook. How tragic for the Duke. Victoria kept her chin, lifted her smile, polite. She knew exactly where those rumors came from. Lucian's sly smiles and Isolde Vesper's lingering glances toward Cassian told her everything. Then the moment came. Isolde approached their small circle, radiant in crimson, her beauty as sharp as a blade. She tilted her head, voice sweet but dripping with venom. "Oh, your grace," she said, addressing Victoria directly while the surrounding lords and ladies listened with eager ears. "How brave of you to attend. Most wives in your delicate position would prefer to remain hidden in the country. After all, it must be difficult knowing your husband's true affections lie elsewhere. Tell me, do you still find comfort in your little herb patches and charity sketches?" A ripple of hushed laughter spread through the group. Victoria felt the words slice deep. The old pain from her wedding night surged forward, the slammed door, the cold rejection, the lonely nights. For a heartbeat she wanted to flee, to disappear into the shadows where no one could see her humiliation. Cassian stood only inches away. He said nothing. His jaw tightened, but his lips remained sealed. His silence was louder than any insult Isolde could utter. It cut deeper than any blade. Victoria's hands trembled slightly at her sides. The room seemed to spin. She could feel every eye upon her, waiting for her to crumble. But something inside her, forged in months of quiet endurance, refused to break. She drew in a slow, steady breath. Then she stepped forward, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the sudden hush. "Mrs. Vesper, you speak of delicate positions with such confidence, yet I wonder if you truly understand the weight of responsibility that comes with the Northbrook name." She turned slightly toward the gentleman gathered nearby, her gaze calm but piercing. "His Grace's land reform bill seeks to protect small tenant farmers from enclosure, a noble cause. However, the proposed compensation rates in the current draft are far too low. They would leave many families destitute within 2 seasons. I noticed this weeks ago while reviewing the estate accounts. If the clause is not amended to include a 3-year grace period and adjusted crop yield protections, the bill will fail, and the very people it claims to help will suffer most." She paused, letting her words settle. "I have taken the liberty of preparing a detailed alternative proposal with supporting figures from Northbrook's own harvest records. It is ready for His Grace's review whenever he wishes." The entire ballroom fell into stunned silence. No one laughed now. Isolde's smile faltered her face, paling beneath the rouge. Cassian stared at Victoria, his dark eyes wide with genuine shock. For the first time he saw not the quiet, unwanted wife he had married, but a woman of sharp intelligence and quiet strength who had been working in the shadows to support his own ambitions. The conversation around them slowly resumed, but the tone had shifted. Whispers of admiration replaced the earlier mockery. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, Cassian followed Victoria into the private sitting room of their London residence. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. She stood near the window, her back to him, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her composure together. "Victoria." His voice was rough, hesitant. He took a step closer. "About what happened tonight, I should have spoken. I should have stopped her." She turned slowly to face him. Her eyes, usually so guarded now, burned with quiet fire. "You should have," she said softly, but there was steel beneath the words. "Instead, you chose silence, in front of everyone who matters. You let her humiliate me while you stood there, as if I were nothing." Cassian flinched. The weight of his inaction pressed down on him like a physical force. He opened his mouth, searching for words that suddenly felt inadequate. "I never meant for it to go this far. Isolde. She is part of my past. I thought I could keep things separate. I thought you thought I would remain invisible." Victoria interrupted, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "You thought I would accept my role as a shadow in your life. But I am not a shadow, Cassian. Not anymore." She took a step toward him, close enough that he could see the unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "You chose to remain silent before the world tonight. Now you must live with the consequence of that silence." She turned away, leaving him standing alone by the dying fire. Cassian remained motionless long after she had gone. The memory of her steady voice revealing the flaw in his bill echoed in his mind. The admiration in the eyes of men who had once dismissed her. The way she had protected his reputation, even while he had failed to protect her. For the first time, a deep, aching regret settled in his chest, and beneath it, something even more dangerous began to stir, a reluctant admiration, and the first fragile crack in the walls he had built around his heart. The messenger arrived soaked and breathless, his horse lathered with mud. "Your Grace, the river is rising faster than anyone predicted. The lower fields will be underwater by nightfall. Hundreds of families, their homes, their crops, everything is at risk." Victoria's heart slammed against her ribs as she stood in the entrance hall of Northbrook Manor. Cassian was still in London, entangled in the political scandal Lucian and Isolde had stirred up. There was no time to wait for him. She turned to the frightened messenger, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Sound the alarm bells. Tell every able man and woman to gather at the riverbank. We will not lose Northbrook without a fight." For 3 days and 3 nights the storm raged. Rain fell in relentless sheets, turning roads into rivers and fields into lakes. Victoria worked without rest. She had spent countless quiet hours in the library studying old books on hydrology and flood control, knowledge she had never imagined she would need. Now that hidden knowledge became her weapon. She stood waist-deep in churning water skirts, heavy and clinging, a soaked map clutched in her hands. Her voice rose above the roar of the rain as she directed the villagers and servants. "Reinforce that section of the dike first, move the sandbags higher. Yes, there, Mr. Quill. How much grain do we have left in the upper barns?" Mr. Quill, drenched but determined, shouted back the figures, his respect for her growing with every command she gave. He had never seen a lady of her station wade into danger like this, yet she moved with calm precision, never raising her voice in panic. Mrs. Bramley worked beside her, sleeves rolled up, passing tools and encouraging the younger servants. At one point, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm the line, the housekeeper turned to a group of hesitant men and said firmly, "Follow her grace. She has already saved more lives in this estate than most of us ever will. Do not fail her now." The people listened. They called her the Iron Duchess in hushed, awed tones as she moved from one crisis point to another, organizing evacuation of the elderly and children to higher ground, distributing what little food they had, and never once stepping back from the freezing water. On the third night, the worst seemed inevitable. The main dike began to crack under the pressure. Villagers screamed as water surged through the breach. Victoria grabbed a heavy beam herself, her arms burning with effort, and shouted, "Push it into place, hold it, do not let go." Her hands bled. Her body trembled from cold and fatigue, but she did not yield. And somehow, they held. The river crested, then slowly began to recede. When Cassian finally arrived, he rode through the pouring rain like a man possessed. His horse slipped in the mud as he dismounted near the riverbank. What he saw stopped him cold. There in the middle of the flooded field stood Victoria. Her hair had come loose, plastered against her pale face. Her gown was ruin-torn and mud-stained. Yet she stood tall, pointing toward a weakened section of the dike, issuing clear orders with a voice hoarse but unwavering. For one long, breathless moment, Cassian could only stare. This was not the quiet, wounded woman he had left behind in London. This was someone entirely different, strong, decisive, unbreakable. He had underestimated her so completely. As the rain began to ease, Victoria finally stepped out of the water legs, shaking with exhaustion. Mrs. Bramley hurried to wrap a blanket around her shoulders. Cassian approached slowly. His boots sank into the mud with every step. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee right there in the flooded courtyard, ignoring the water soaking through his fine clothes. "Victoria." His voice cracked raw with emotion he could no longer hide. "I have been blind. I have been cruel. I was wrong. So very wrong from the very beginning." He looked up at her, rain mixing with the moisture in his eyes. "All this time while I chased power and old ghosts in London, you were here, saving what I should have protected, becoming what I never deserved." Victoria stood still, chest heaving from exhaustion and the storm of feelings inside her. She looked down at the man kneeling before her, the same man who had locked her out on their wedding night, who had remained silent while she was humiliated in front of the tun. Her eyes were tired, but they burned with a quiet, fierce light. She did not speak. Not yet. She simply held his gaze, letting the weight of his words hang between them in the rain-soaked silence. The question lingered unspoken in the damp air. Could one moment of regret truly begin to heal the deep wounds he had carved into her heart over 2 long, lonely years? Or was it already too late? The days after the flood brought a different kind of storm. Northbrook Manor transformed into a living sanctuary. The grand halls, once cold and echoing, now filled with the sounds of villagers seeking shelter. Makeshift beds lined the ballroom. Long tables in the dining room groaned under whatever food and medicine Victoria could gather. She moved among the people with quiet purpose, organizing distributions, comforting frightened children, and listening to elderly widows share their fears. She never once asked Cassian for help, not a single request. She handled every detail herself, drawing on the same inner strength that had carried her through the rising waters. The villagers watched her with open admiration now. Whispers of the Iron Duchess had softened into something warmer, the Duchess of the people. Word traveled quickly to London. In drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs, the tun spoke of her with a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. The forgotten wife had become the heart of Northbrook. But not everyone welcomed the change. In a final, desperate move, Lucian and Isolde struck. They spread forged documents claiming Victoria had diverted relief funds for her own benefit. The accusation spread like poison through London society, threatening to undo everything she had built. Whispers turned vicious once more. Some even suggested she should be investigated. Victoria felt the old wound reopen. The fear of being seen as worthless returned sharper than before. She stood at the window of her chamber one evening, staring out at the recovering fields, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Would this pain never end? Then on the day of a crucial parliamentary session, everything shifted. Torrin Vesper Isolde's father stepped forward unexpectedly. A stern, silver-haired man who had long remained in the shadows, he had once witnessed the darkest chapter of Cassian's past. Now he chose truth over blood. In front of a packed gallery, Torrin publicly denounced the forged evidence. His voice rang clear and heavy with disappointment. "My own daughter has gone too far. These documents are false. The Duchess has given everything to protect Northbrook, while others sought only to tear it down." The chamber fell silent. Isolde's face drained of color. Lucian's calculated smile finally cracked. Cassian rose from his seat. He walked to the center of the floor with deliberate steps. Every eye turned to him. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Northbrook spoke not as a powerful man protecting his pride, but as a husband defending his wife. "I will not allow these lies to stand," he said, his voice steady but laced with deep emotion. "My wife has shown more courage, more compassion, and more true leadership in the past 2 years than I have shown in a lifetime. The accusations against her are baseless and cruel." He paused, then continued with quiet resolve. "Furthermore, I hereby relinquish my sole authority over the personal estates and charitable funds of Northbrook. From this day forward, the Duchess shall manage them independently as she sees fit. She has earned that right and far more." Gasps echoed through the room. No duke had ever willingly surrendered such power to his wife. Cassian's eyes found Victoria where she sat in the gallery. In that single look, she saw the depth of his regret and the beginning of something new. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in soft gold and amber, Cassian and Victoria stood together on the crest of the highest hill overlooking Northbrook Manor. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of damp earth and late autumn flowers. Below them, the manor no longer looked like a golden prison. It looked like home alive, breathing, healed. Cassian turned to her. His usual confidence had been replaced by a vulnerability that made her heart ache in an entirely different way. "I spent so long believing love was about control," he said quietly, his voice rough with feeling. "About protecting myself from pain. I was wrong. True love, it means watching someone shine and having the courage to step back so they can burn brighter." Victoria remained silent for a long moment. Memories of slammed doors, lonely nights, and public silence washed over her. The pain was still there, deep and real. But so was her own growth. She had learned that strength did not always mean fighting back. Sometimes it meant choosing to build again, even when every part of her wanted to walk away. She reached out and gently placed her hand over his. "We cannot erase the past, Cassian." She whispered, her voice soft but clear. "The wounds, the silence, the nights I cried alone. They will always be part of us, but we can choose how we write the next chapter. Starting today." Cassian's fingers tightened around hers. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss there, tender, reverent, full of unspoken promises. As the last light of day faded behind the ancient oaks, they stood together shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the estate that had once divided them, and now bound them in a new fragile hope. In the end, Victoria had discovered the greatest truth of all pain and injustice could forge an unbreakable spirit. Real love only began when two people learned to truly respect and trust one another. And the deepest strength a woman could possess was not found in being loved, but in learning to stand tall on her own while still keeping her heart open and kind. Northbrook Manor glowed warmly in the distance, its windows shining like beacons. For the first time in years, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.